But what we're going to talk about today are means, ways, devices, things you can do to take ground, to take space, and enhance that energy that's there, to do something with it, to make it more special unto you. We're going to talk a lot about the word garden, so we're going to refer to a lot of yards and garden things like that, but it also is something that you can incorporate into your apartment if you live there. Of course, the ideas have to be reduced on a much smaller level, and you have to use a little imagination for it. But it's still workable inside, indoors. But primarily we're going to talk about everything outside and what you can do outside in your yard, in your garden, to make it a very special, unique place for yourself. Of course, in our Western culture, a primary remembrance of garden, of course, is the Garden of Eden. We all can think of that as the past. And if we think of Adam and Eve first in the garden, is a time where they found true happiness. When they were first in the garden, they were truly at peace because they were still part of the earth. They were still part of nature. They were incorporated with it. And then the great sin came along and they were cast out. And ever since, of course, we've been trying to get back into it. One of the things I like to do in other presentations is also go through ancient literature and try to tie it in with today's modern science and figure out how the ancients knew what was going on in the universe today. And actually the Garden of Eden is an excellent symbology of that too, because if you think about it, the sin being cast out was sort of like the big bang of the mind. That is when humans reached consciousness. Because you think about animals, think of humans before that, they were like animals. I mean, you see tracks on the ground. If you don't smell anything, you don't have no idea what the tracks represent. But once consciousness hits, it starts to tell you that there is something beyond those tracks. An animal came this way. And so the big bang of the mind, when actually they were cast out. In a little bit of a historical view, if we look at gardens of the past, we can talk about some of the huge gardens that existed before. Obviously, one of the seven wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. We talk about the Egyptian gardens, the Moorish gardens that used the two great rivers of the world, the Tigris and Euphrates, that would divide up the world into four quadrants, and God was at the center of it. In the Middle Ages, we have the monastery gardens where they had the little herbal gardens. They had the little flower gardens, the meditation gardens where people were at. The huge gardens at Versailles that could almost feed most of the people of France. And then as we go further and further closer to our times, we start to come into the idea of doing something with your garden besides just growing food. Granted, in the past, people who had more wealth and who had more opportunity, or kings and queens, you can have all these people come in and make these huge, elaborate gardens for you. Besides just growing food, you can bring in flowers and hedges and plants of all kinds. But for most people, it was simply growing food. Interspersing food with some herbs and some flowers to make it look nice, but primarily the idea was food. Even in the victory gardens of World War II, primarily growing food so you can survive on. And then after the wars, the Korean and the World War II, and you had all the people moving to the suburbs, you had a tremendous housing boom, and all these people living in the same little houses decided, you know, maybe we ought to do something different with it. Maybe we ought to make our little home a little bit special and different and landscape things a little bit more unusual than the person next door. And so you started to have all this ideas dealing with landscapes and what you can put together to make your place unusual and different. And of course, today we have all kinds of stuff going on, all types of nurseries and everything going on, and people trying to be totally different with it. We even have some of the remnants of the old gardens, you know, like Kingwood Gardens down in Mansfield, the Biltmore Estates down in Asheville, where you have this huge, gigundous garden complex. You have remnants in all the botanical gardens and the arboretums and such that are around.